Hey everyone, Quentin Figueroa here with Crowd Freedom, and we're going to talk about who will take care of poor people in a free society. So this is a really important topic that comes up a lot, so I want to spend some time on it and address it. So let's start off with a quote from none other than Ludwig von Mises. And he says, "Then there are people who assert that something must be wrong with the social sciences because social conditions are unsatisfactory. The natural sciences have achieved amazing results in the last 200 or 300 years, and the practical utilization of these results has succeeded in improving the general standard of living to an unprecedented extent. But, say the critics, the social sciences have utterly failed in the task of rendering social conditions more satisfactory. They have not stamped out misery and starvation, economic crisis and unemployment, war and tyranny. They are sterile and have contributed nothing to the promotion of happiness and human welfare. These grumblers do not realize that the tremendous progress of technological methods of production and the resulting increase in wealth and welfare were feasible only through the pursuit of those liberal policies which were practical application of the teachings of economists. It was the ideas of the classical economists that removed the checks imposed by age-old laws, customs, and prejudices upon technological improvement, and freed the genius of reformers and innovators from the straitjackets of the guilds, government tutelage, and social pressure of various kinds. It was they that reduced the prestige of conquerors and expropriators and demonstrated the social benefits derived from business activity. None of the great modern inventions would have been put to use if the mentality of the pre-capitalistic era had not been thoroughly demolished by the economists. What is commonly called the Industrial Revolution was an offspring of the ideological revolution brought about by the doctrines of the economists. The economists exploded the old tenets that it is unfair and unjust to outdo a competitor by producing better and cheaper goods, that it is iniquitous to deviate from the traditional methods of production, that machines are an evil because they bring about unemployment, that it is one of the tasks of civil government to prevent efficient businessmen from getting rich and to protect the less efficient against the competition of the more efficient, that to restrict the freedom of entrepreneurs by government compulsion or by coercion on the part of social powers is an appropriate means to promote a nation's well-being." So, this is a really important quote because so often in life, we fail to see how much free markets have improved the standard of living that we really do have. Many of the things that we take for granted these days came about because of free markets, which is the foundation of a free society. So the fact that we have cars, airplanes, mobile phones, computers, we even have things like indoor plumbing or heating and cooling in our homes. These are things that didn't even exist 200 or 300 years ago. All of the poor people in America, they all live better than the kings, queens, and the elites did 200 years ago in any society. So poverty, poor people, they already are living better today because of free markets. And we need to really understand that. The Industrial Revolution, it came about because of free markets and because of the ability for people to practice freedom and to follow their own motives, their own desires on what to create. And because of this, we get many of the innovations that we have not gotten had government continued to control markets like they did before that. So poverty is already going away because of free markets in the world. We know this because places that are more likely to practice capitalism or anything that's closer to a free society, those countries and those places have far less poverty than the ones that are closer to a centrally planned government that has less freedom. A great example of this is North and South Korea. So around a little over 50 years ago, the North and South Korea, it was just Korea, and they created a split between North Korea and South Korea. Now, North Korea maintained being a centrally planned government, where South Korea became a constitutional republic. And at this time, both of these nations were relatively poor. The people there were relatively poor. Through the last 50 years or so, South Korea, because of its freedom, it's much closer to a free society than North Korea, and because of this, South Korea has become the most free place in Eastern Asia, while North Korea is one of the poorest nations in the entire world. Now, we're talking the same type of people with different governments and different societies. The society that is closer to a free society, which is by far South Korea, created much more wealth and much less poverty than North Korea. So already, just in a small example, you can see how free societies do much better for eliminating poverty. There are much less poor people in South Korea than in North Korea. And even the fact that, so between 1993 and 2000, North Korea, a population of 22 million, had 240,000 to 3.5 million people die from starvation or some hunger-related illness, which is absolutely devastating. And you're seeing how poor people are doing really bad in North Korea, where in South Korea you don't have these types of things occurring. Now, we need to distinguish between relative poverty and absolute poverty. Relative poverty is basically the difference between rich people and poor people in a society, but where poor people are always going to be poor relative to a rich person in, say, like a free society. But then you also have absolute poverty where people are really poor, like where they're dying of starvation and that type of thing. So say in America, which is a fairly free society, or at least was, you have less poverty in America than, say, Africa or places like this, because, well, you have more relative poverty, where the poorest person in America is doing a lot better than the poorest person in Africa. So relative to a rich person in America, yeah, people might be poor, but a poor person in America relative to a poor person in Africa is actually doing pretty well, and you could consider rich. So poverty is relative, and there's always going to be a difference of poverty between rich and poor people within a society. But in a society that's free, the poverty is a temporary condition that can always be changed, for the most part, by choice. So people in a free society are basically able to become rich if they do things that rich people do. If they were to, create a business or a service, educate themselves, or this type of thing. Where in places more like Africa, where you have less freedom, you have governments that do not allow for markets, you're going to have more absolute poverty, where people are unable, or it's much, much, much harder to become wealthy or rich because the system does not allow a market to take place, which would alleviate that. So a poor person in America, they might have a worse car, a smaller home, They might have less technology or less ability to travel than a rich person, but a poor person in America, by having even a car, is living way better than a rich person in Africa. So there's a huge difference between being relatively poor or being absolutely poor. And you know this because if you look at immigration, people would rather be poor in free societies than they would be poor in a not-so-free society. That's why you have immigration problems in places like America and Europe. You have people coming from less poor societies, like Mexico, into America because they'd rather be poor in America than poor in Mexico. You have people from North Africa and the Middle East coming into Europe because they'd rather be poor in Europe than in those places. So immigration is showing how not all poverty is the same, and it's relative, so it totally depends. Now, intelligence also plays into this. Smarter people make more income. That's a fact. If you're smarter, you're usually more creative, you're better at problem solving, you're quicker at figuring things out, and you're better at making money. And making money isn't a bad thing. When you make money, you're solving problems and making everyone else's life better. So smarter people make more income, and a free society encourages smart people. Smart people champion free societies because it allows them the maximum amount of freedom and choice. So a free society is going to have smarter people. And smarter people are going to be wealthier, so free societies are going to be wealthier. You don't have welfare or things like this in a free society. So people that normally immigrate to a nation to take advantage of these things aren't going to do so in a totally free society because they don't exist. So in that way, a free society almost regulates itself by having smart people live there, because dumb people aren't going to want to live in a free society as much, because dumb people don't want freedom as much as a smart person does. A dumb person might want somebody else to control them or to make decisions for them, where a smart person wants complete control over their own decisions and they want to make those decisions themselves. So in this way, a free society is going to have more intelligent people, and less intelligent people are not going to go there to try to take advantage or hurt wealthier people through some type of government system that wealthy people are forced to support. So you don't have this problem as much in a free society. And of course, we know that governments are notorious for keeping people in poverty. Governments are, poverty in itself is a creation of government. Free markets alleviate poverty, governments create it. For example, the whole welfare system. The way government handles welfare is terrible, and the incentives they create for people are very hurtful towards poor people. The government, when you're on welfare, the whole purpose of welfare should be to bring people out of poverty into the workforce and into taking care of themselves. The welfare system through the government does not work that way. The welfare system keeps people in poverty. The incentives of the welfare system if you're in government welfare, you're getting money until you get out of it. And once you get out of it, it requires you to work. And if you're making, as soon as you start making a certain amount of money, you're no longer in welfare. So if you're under that amount of money, then you're going to continue to get welfare. So that is an incentive, albeit a really bad one, for you to not make a certain amount of money. So you're incentivized with welfare to make under a certain amount of money to avoid getting off of welfare. So the welfare system doesn't encourage people to support themselves outside of the system, because as soon as they do, they're losing that system, and they'd much rather get the easy money that they can get if they make less than a certain amount of money than actually have to work and support themselves and give up welfare. Why would you work harder for money if you could not work hard and get it still through the welfare system? So it creates an incentive for people to stay on welfare. And we're much better off teaching people how to fish than giving them a fish. And the welfare system gives people a fish every day. And that's an unsustainable model because you're not producing. And if you're not taking care of yourself and producing, then you're forcing other people to take care of you and you're hurting them. So it becomes a net loss for everybody to have a welfare system. Another thing governments do is the minimum wage. Most poor people think minimum wage is a great thing. Unfortunately, poor people get hurt the most from minimum wage. All the minimum wage system does is it creates a floor. It creates a minimum amount of money an employer has to pay somebody. So if somebody is only worth $5 an hour and the minimum wage is $10 an hour, then that $5 an hour person doesn't get paid $10 an hour. They get fired, they lose their job, and they become unemployed. So minimum wage is a bad thing for people that are poor because people need to work. And if you keep raising the minimum wage, you make it more expensive to hire low-skilled workers, and poor people are low-skilled workers, and all you're doing is creating more unemployment for poor people. It's a terrible idea, and it's an absurd system. So the free market is most certainly better than the government at anything. The free market can do anything better than the government because of the way it works. It's just like how math is better at solving problems involving numbers than something like English. Free markets are a better system for improving the standard of living of people. Free markets are a better system for allowing people to participate in freedom and to have the maximum amount of choice and free will. And free markets are the best at creating things for people. They are better than governments. So whatever the government does, the market can do better. So if the government is already what we use to handle charity and taking care of poor people, we know just because of the way markets work that the market could do it better. So let me give you a quote, another one, this time by Stefan Molyneux, that talks a little bit about this. He says, "Oh no, without the government forcing people to be charitable, no one would lift a finger to help the poor. People are so selfish, they don't care, etc., etc., etc. This paradox cannot be unraveled this side of insanity. If a democratic government must force a selfish and unwilling populace to help the poor, then government programs do not reflect the will of the people. And democracy is a lie, and we must get rid of it, or at least stop pretending to vote. If democracy is not a lie, then existing government programs accurately represent the will of the majority. And thus the poor, the sick, and the old will have nothing to fear from a stateless society and will, for many reasons, be far better taken care of by private charity than government programs." So this right here is a really interesting point, and he's basically saying that America's a democracy, and if people really care about the poor, as is shown by us having democratic programs that take care of poor people, then that means majority of people do care about poor people, and they would be taken care of in a free society because majority of people care about that. What people care about, they do. And he's saying if it's not a democracy, or if people really don't care about poor people, then we need to stop calling America a democracy because majority of people don't care about poor people, and America is forcing people to take care of poor people. So which one is it? Does America really care about poor people, or do they not? And I think most people would say they do. And if that's the case, then the same would happen in a free society. since majority of people care about poor people, myself included, we would take care of them. And poor people are going to be taken care of better by a private charity system than a state system. And not only that, because the free market is better at doing things than the state, it's going to be done much better. Only about 20% of taxes go towards the actual charity service itself, welfare, in the government. In a free market, much more than 20% of the funds collected are going to go towards helping poor people. But not only that, because free societies have better services, higher quality services for less money, and because people are going to be wealthier in a free society, charity is going to be better and cheaper. People are going to have more money to give to charity than they do right now in the state system. So mathematically, scientifically, logically, and historically, it makes way more sense to help people through a free society than it does through a state government centrally controlled system. You can see with all these things that the free market and the free society approach is much better at helping poor people. So if you really do care about poor people, and you really want to help poor people, and you really want to eliminate poverty, then you need to support the system and the method that is most capable of doing that. And that method is free markets and free societies. Thank you very much.